I never thought I'd be confessing this story, yet here I am. It's been 4 years. 4 years of living a double life, of stolen moments and whispered words that no one else can ever know. 4 years of breaking every rule I thought I'd live by. The thing is, James isn't just any man. He's married. To Claire, my boss. And yet, here I am, unable to stop myself from wanting him, from loving him. It all started when I joined Claire's firm. She was an icon in the industry, intimidatingly brilliant, fiercely driven, and untouchable. I admired her. I wanted to be her. James, on the other hand, was just her husband. Polite, handsome in that understated way, but hardly someone I noticed at first. He was always around the office during events or meetings, but he blended into the background. At least, at first. One late evening, after months of working at the firm, something shifted. I was the last one in the office, drowning in paperwork under the unforgiving fluorescent lights. Claire had left hours ago, with James staying behind to collect her things. I didn't even notice him until he appeared in the doorway with 2 steaming cups of coffee. "You look like you could use this," he said, handing me one. His voice was warm, soothing. The kind of voice that made you feel like everything would be okay, even if you were drowning. I took the cup, startled but grateful. "Thank you," I said, offering a small, tired smile. "No problem," he replied, leaning casually against the doorway. "You're always the last one here, aren't you? Claire talks about how dedicated you are." That simple comment caught me off guard. Claire had never said anything directly to me about my efforts. It was as though James had noticed something about me that even she hadn't. For the first time, I looked at him. Really looked. His brown eyes held a kindness that was disarming, and his smile was gentle. It wasn't the kind of charm that overwhelmed you. It was subtle, patient, and magnetic in its simplicity. We started talking about work, about the ridiculous hours, even about the mediocre office coffee. His laugh was quiet, a little self-deprecating, and the way his eyes lingered on mine just a second too long made my chest tighten. It was nothing, I told myself. Just small talk. But when I walked to my car that night, his scent, a soft mix of cedarwood and vanilla, lingered on my sweater, and I couldn't stop thinking about him. Before we go further, if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Your support helps us share more gripping stories like this one. Over the next few weeks, those late-night encounters became a pattern, always accidental, always brief, but they started to feel less like coincidences and more like unspoken agreements. He'd bring me coffee, ask about my day, and linger just a little longer each time. His presence became something I looked forward to, even though I knew I shouldn't. He noticed things no one else did. When I was stressed, he'd crack a small joke to make me laugh. When I stayed late, he'd remind me to take a break. There was a kindness to him that was hard to ignore, and soon, those moments started to mean more than they should. Then, Claire announced she'd be traveling for a conference out of state. She'd be gone for 3 days, leaving James to attend a company dinner in her place. At first, it seemed like just another busy week, until James sent me a text the morning Claire left. "Ellie, do you have a moment to talk later? Maybe privately?" His message read. I stared at the text, my heart racing. I didn't know what he meant, but part of me wanted to find out. Later that day, James approached me in the office. His tone was casual, but his eyes were intense. With Claire out of town, I thought we could catch up somewhere quieter. Just to clear the air, he said. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaky. "There's a small inn by the coast," he said, hesitating. "It's quiet, out of the way. I'll book a room. I felt my stomach twist. I knew what he was asking, and yet I couldn't bring myself to say no. "Okay," I whispered, barely recognizing my own voice. The hours leading up to that meeting were torture. I told myself 1,000 times I wouldn't go, that it was too dangerous, too wrong. But when the time came, I found myself driving to the inn. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly they ached, and my heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. When I arrived, James was waiting for me outside, leaning against his car with his hands in his pockets. His smile was hesitant, almost nervous, but his eyes softened when they met mine. "You came," he said softly, his voice filled with relief. Inside the room, the tension was palpable. The air felt heavy with everything we weren't saying. I stood by the window, staring out at the dark expanse of the ocean, trying to steady my breathing. James approached me slowly, his footsteps quiet but deliberate. "Ellie," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "If you want me to stop, just say the word." I turned to him, and when our eyes met, something inside me broke. I closed the distance between us, and when his lips met mine, it was like the world stopped spinning. That night, everything I'd ever imagined about him became real. His hands moved over me with a tenderness that felt almost reverent. He wasn't just touching me. He was learning me, reading every reaction, every breath. He guided me to the bed, and when he laid me down, his eyes lingered on me as if I were something precious. "You're incredible," he murmured, his voice shaking. "Do you know that?" I couldn't respond. Words felt too small for the magnitude of what I was feeling. Instead, I pulled him closer, needing him to feel how deeply I wanted him, how much I needed this. When our bodies came together, it was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, spiritual, a connection that transcended the boundaries we'd both been so afraid to cross. Every touch, every kiss felt like a declaration, and by the time the night was over, I knew there was no going back. After that night, everything changed. What started as a single moment of surrender quickly became a habit. When Claire returned, James and I found ourselves seeking every opportunity to be alone. The office, once a place of professionalism, became the backdrop for our stolen moments. It started with hurried kisses behind closed doors, but soon we were taking greater risks. After-hours meetings turned into passionate encounters. One evening, as I worked late, James walked in, his tie loosened and his hair slightly messy. He closed the door behind him and crossed the room in a few quick strides. His lips were on mine before I could say a word, his hands gripping my waist as he pressed me against the desk. "Ellie," he murmured, his voice filled with desperation. "I can't stop. Every time I see you, He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. The way he kissed me, the way he held me, said everything he couldn't put into words. But reality always found a way to intrude. James belonged to Claire, and I was the woman betraying her trust. Every time she praised my work or confided in me, I felt like a fraud. But the pull to James was stronger than my shame, stronger than my fear. For 4 years, we lived in this bubble, pretending it could last forever. But the cracks have started to show. Lately, Claire's been asking more questions, making veiled comments that leave me wondering if she knows. And James? James has grown distant. Or maybe I have. The thing is, I'm 34 now. My biological clock feels like it's screaming at me. The desire to be a mother is overwhelming, and James doesn't want more children. He's made that clear. I've started researching clinics, looking at donors. It's crazy, I know, but it feels like the only way forward. I've even thought about doing it without telling him, having a child on my own. But every time I imagine it, The idea of losing him is unbearable. James once told me he loved me. It was during another weekend conference. As we lay there, tangled in each other, he whispered it. I love you, Ellie. I don't want to lose you. But love isn't enough. Not when it comes with this much baggage. And now, I'm standing at a crossroads. If Claire finds out, I lose everything. My job, my reputation, the life I've built. But if I stay, I lose myself. Claire once said something to me that I'll never forget. Love is a luxury people like us can't afford. We sacrifice too much for it. And in the end, it's never enough. At the time, I thought she was just being cynical. But now, I wonder if she was right. Maybe some love stories aren't meant to have happy endings. Maybe the best I can hope for is to hold on to the memories, to the moments when it felt like we could defy the odds, when it felt like fate. But as I sit here, staring at the phone, the weight of these choices feels unbearable. Do I choose him, knowing it means giving up a part of myself? Or do I choose myself and risk losing him forever? The thought terrifies me. I've drafted a message to him so many times, words that could end it, or beg him to fight for us. But I can't bring myself to hit send. Not yet. Maybe not ever.